Welcome, it's me Legacy, and in this one it's all about Analogue, EQs and Channelstrip plugins. I'm gonna first explain you the difference between an analog emulation and the clinical plugins. Then I'm going to show you the few plugins I use, and at the end I'm gonna show you the best free analog EQ plugin. So let's get into it. I'm going to use Cubase, but since we are working with third-party plugins, you can use any DAW. So let me show you the track. So let's hear this little loop in solo. Okay, this is the frequency plugin by Steinberg. This is what I call a clinical plugin, because it's actually precisely doing what the parameters are saying. If you're boosting with this kind of plugins, it actually often doesn't sound good, because, well, it actually just puts up the noise floor from here. Typically, with this kind of clinical processors, you only want to cut sounds, and if you boost, just very little. But boosting sounds is actually where the analog processors come in. So let's open the Channelstrip plugin. I'm gonna start here with the SSL E Channel by Waves. This is actually an emulation of a real console. We're gonna later look as well into the G Channel, because SSL actually has two different kinds of equalizers. Nowadays on the new consoles they actually have a button to switch between them. The thing with Analogue is that it is not perfect. It has small imperfections due to the manufacturing of actual hardware. And for some of these devices, it sounds arguably a lot more pleasant than just running a clean digital calculations. So what these plugins aim to do is to emulate or to recreate the imperfection of the specific hardware. So let's talk about the sound of the E channel. It is clean in the perspective that it doesn't give a lot of saturation or distortion, but it still has a very nice color to it. One of the main strengths of these channel strips are actually the filters, because they are super smooth, even if they are automated. So let's listen to the filter in action. As you hear, this one is very clean. I often use this one to filter out my kicks to get into a break. Another thing I like about this plugin is the low frequency shelf. I actually use this quite often to boost the bass. So let's turn up the frequency a bit. It actually gives a lot of energy to the bass. Usually with clinical EQs you don't want to boost, because it never sounds really good and it's kind of harsh. But with this kind of analog emulations, they give a little bit of saturation, a little bit of color to it, so that it actually sounds very good. And different equalizers are good to boost different frequencies. So for example, I would always use this channel to boost the low end. Another part is the high frequency. I'm gonna boost this one, and then later on we're gonna compare this to the other channels. The high frequency is really where we hear the difference between the different processes. So let's listen to how this sounds. When boosting higher on this one, it still sounds clean, but it's kind of brittle, and the energy goes a little bit away. Let's compare it to its brother, the SSL G Channel. I'm gonna do the same thing, where I'm gonna play the music and then I'm gonna run the filter, the bass and the high end. So you're gonna listen to it, how it sounds. I hope you can hear the difference on YouTube. This one is actually a lot more resonant, a lot more harsh, and has more distortion to it. So I would say it sounds more aggressive. Especially the filter, when modulating, you get this kind of resonance sweeping up. So the bass boost sounds kind of muddy, so I typically don't use this one, because I don't think it really fits in the production. Interesting here is as well the high frequency, because it's a little bit more aggressive, more harsh. So if you have an element which lacks a little bit of interest in the high end, you may boost it with this one. I'm not gonna focus on the low mid and high mid to not make the video too long. They are a little bit more aggressive than the ones on the E channel. If you are like this typical SSL mixer, you're gonna use the E channel for the more clean processing and the G channel if you need to get dirty. But nowadays I actually don't use the G channel that much, because I found out that the Focusrite channel by Brainworx is very similar from the sound characteristics to the G channel in the way that it is more aggressive and a little bit more resonant, but I think it has a more pleasant sound. So let's listen to this one. I'm going to again play the sound. I'm gonna adjust the low cut filter. I'm gonna make a low boost and a high boost while the sound is playing. Notice how this sound is really similar to the G channel with some differences. I really like the filter from this Channelstrip because it cuts a lot steeper, meaning that from the point where it starts processing to the complete cut is less bass, which is more optimal for modern productions. The low end I don't dig too much. I think it's similar to the G channel, and I would always prefer the E channel low boost over this one. But then on the other side, we've got here this very beautiful high frequency boost, which is similar into the G channel that it gives saturation, but I think the saturation sounds a lot warmer, a lot more pleasant. And I think again here the high mid and the low mid are a little bit less important. So I'll choose the Channelstrip regarding if I want to do a bass boost or high boost, if at all, and then I may use these processes if they are needed. Another nice thing about this plugin is the compressor, where I don't really like the SSL compressors, as they don't really have a lot of functionalities because quite important knobs as the attack are missing. So I'm just gonna show you the compressor on this one. It's very nice to do this kind of sucking or this biting compression where you put in a long attack and a fast release so that the transient of the sound is getting through and it's getting then diminished. But if you want to get more into transient design, check my video on the transgressor too. So let's get to our next plugin. It's SieQ by Soundtoys. I think this is actually not based on a very specific hardware unit, but it's generally emulating the analog sound. Interesting here is that you have a drive knob, so you can basically control the saturation or distortion of the EQ separately from the other knobs. So I'm gonna do a bass boost and a high boost while playing the sound. The bass boost is a little bit subtle and you cannot say the frequency where it starts, so it's a little bit less useful than one on each channel. Where the high boost actually gives it a very nice sound. I'd say it's kind of similar to the Brainworx and I would use it as well to boost the highs. So let's check the drive knob. So with the drive knob you can really get into the distortion. And the overdrive gonna affect the settings we put in here. So right now the highs is more driven than the other elements. It's well heard that we can get really into the distortion element, which can be interesting for sound design. So we were now boosting all the time to get this analog flavor, but we can as well get the same thing with attenuating. So let's reset this one, and I'm gonna now attenuate the mid sections, and I'm gonna drive the plugin, and we're gonna see what's happening. So right now it actually sounds like the bass and the highs were boosted, but actually we just diminished the mid and then overdriven a bit to saturate this up to get this warmth. This approach is more similar to what you would do with a clinical EQ, because there you would actually carve out the frequencies which you don't want to actually get the other ones louder in the mix. But with the analog EQs, you often find yourself boosting because you want the imperfection and the color and the character of this process. Okay, cool, so let's get to the next one. Bypass this one. It's the PulTec 1A, here in the Waves Puigtec emulation. This one is very interesting because it has a lot less functionality than the other ones. You basically have here the bass section, which are these 3 knobs. You got these 3 knobs, which are the mid section, and then you got the high section, which are these 2 knobs. So here these flat knobs are always selecting the frequency. So you can from the bass go to 20, 30, 60 or 100 Hz. The high frequency actually is in kilohertz. So you have 3K, 4K, 5K, 8K, 10K, 12K and 16K. We see as well the high end with 5K, 10K and 20K. So you see that the ranges are quite large, so you have to compromise on what you are using. Interesting feature is that you can boost and attenuate the bass at the same time, which is giving a very interesting sound. And that's the sound which makes this equalizer very famous. So let me show it. So show it again. So as you can see here, we actually have boosted by 7 and attenuated by 7, which would technically mean in a digital way that it is exactly similar. But it obviously is sounding a lot different. Because the hardware is actually based on tubes, you get this very nice effect, because they are dependent on the levels and heat which is generated. Additionally, the boost frequency is a little bit lower than the attenuation frequencies. So by doing what we actually have done right now, we had this bass level and then we're dipping down, then we get back to the mid-range. You see that here you can actually go to 16K, where you can as well attenuate the high range up to 5K down. So basically the mid-range and the high range are lying quite over each other. So let's listen to it. Just using the mid section on 10, 12 or 16K, it's very nice to softly boost the high end. Now at the So I'd say this plugin has actually very soft and warm sound, reminiscent to its tube design. Especially if you are kind of the lo-fi sound, going extreme here on the settings can be very beneficial. Okay, the time has come to get to our free plugin. It's the TDR VOS SlickEQ, which has basically 3 bands, a low, a mid and high. You can change the mid from a shelf to a bell. And the cool thing is that it has 4 different algorithms. So this is basically 4 different emulations. I don't want to get too deep in it because the video is getting too long. If on a budget, this is really nice because you got 4 plugins of 4 equalizers for free. Okay, so I showed you now the plugins I am using. The most important thing is to actually get now a couple of plugins, 2 or 3, maximum 4, and really know how they sound and what characteristics they have. So you know that on exactly which sound you need to have which EQ or channel strip to get a certain sound. But for now, this is all I had to say about this subject. If you got any questions or want to tell me what plugins you are using, drop a comment below. And if you learned anything, consider liking and subscribing. See you in the next one.